Quarantine is no more. The world's harshest quarantine is no more. As COVID sweeps through China, the country is scrapping quarantines for inbound travelers from January 8th and promising to gradually restart outbound tourism. Since the start of the pandemic, China has severely limited who can go in and out of the country.
Now, I am not a big fan of CNN, but I do believe their Beijing reporter does a sterling job related to what's happening in Beijing itself and China in general. And if you want to see the full report, I do have it hopefully at the end of this video. Now, the reality is the world needs China and China needs the world. The economy in China over the last 3 years hasn't been the best, even though some shills would say it has been fantastic. It's not the case. Let's think of it logically, in a way that all these lockdowns, restrictions over the last 3 years has really upset the economy. So 2023, I do believe, is going to be a good year, not just for China, but I think for the world. Once this quarantine and restrictions are over completely in China, we can see a relatively bunny rabbit ears new norm. This video here is from a Chinese government official, and he is showing a video of Beijing going back to normal. China is now adopting the policy, the same that the West has had for possibly over a year now, near enough, saying that zero COVID is going to be impossible, but living with COVID is understandable. So that was a report from Chinese state media, Chinese official or government official. Here is one from India, where it's showing some life back to normal in other cities like Beijing, Shanghai, etc. People, yep, are still wearing masks. Yep, there are high cases of COVID. I spoke to 5 people yesterday. I spoke to many people in China yesterday, actually. 4 of them had COVID. It was like a sore throat, a bit of a fever. They just took some paracetamol, they took some anti-painkillers, etc. They laid and rest, and then they were fine a couple of days later and back to normal. Remember, a lot of China is actually really cold at the moment. They do suffer from freezing cold winters. Not all of China, but a lot of China. And in that respect, there's going to be a higher intake of flu and colds as well. Let me show you a snippet from the South China Morning Post. Now, the South China Morning Post does actually originate from Hong Kong. It was bought by Alibaba years ago, so you would say it's part of the state media of China. But this is what they are reporting as well. So it's relatively good news for people in China that life is slowly going back to normal. Good news. I think the fear of COVID is just living with COVID. It's something new in China. No more quarantines, no more lockdowns for now. And on January the 8th, they say inbound travelers can come to China, but I think they need a PCR test 48 hours before. But when they arrive in China, there's no quarantine in a Chinese state government hotel that will cost an arm and a leg. Outbound travelers, they are saying that the tourism and going to other countries will happen soon. But in Japan, this is the thing, they are saying this is from the Japanese Times. Breaking, Prime Minister in Japan says Japan will tighten border restrictions from China from December the 30th. Japan only maybe like 2 months ago said you can come to Japan with no COVID tests. With no COVID test, that's correct, but you would have to have 3 injections. You would have to show that and health insurance, and it's quite strict with masks at the moment. That's sort of breaking news there. So I'm sure other countries are going to be quite dubious about Chinese people coming into other countries. I'm sorry to say, maybe it's the wrong terminology I'm using, but you can understand my drift. In China as well, believe it or not, there's some kind of applications you can get on your phone. You can cough into the phone and this will say, oh, you have COVID or you don't, which is ridiculous. But people will believe it and it will sell, not like hotcakes. But if you want to make sure that you don't, you just either get a test from a hospital or take one of those self-tests that you can find near enough anywhere. There will be more news as I get it, and I hope you do find this channel useful, just giving you the information, what's happening in the People's Republic of China. I don't like most people, like the Chinese government. I think it's corrupt. I think it's like a dictatorship. You could even it's horrible. But the people in China are lovely. The food in China is lovely. The old culture in China, some of the historical buildings and the history is darn amazing. And that's why I think of the people rather than any government. Let me leave you with the report from CNN for about 2 or 3 minutes related to the coronavirus pandemic and saying it's dropped quarantine requirements, and an interview with a Chinese national who's been stuck in New York City near enough for about 3 years. My name is James. Thank you so much for your time. Bye-bye for now. Here's the report.
Is no more. As COVID sweeps through China, the country is scrapping quarantines for inbound travelers from January 8th and promising to gradually restart outbound tourism. Since the start of the pandemic, China has severely limited who can go in and out of the country, drastically cutting the number of flights and forcing all incoming arrivals into government facilities. I went through multiple quarantines in China this year, lasting as long as 21 days. There's no choice in where you go or what room you get. Once the doors close, you can only open them for COVID tests and food pickups. Workers spray disinfectant in the hallways every few hours. Food delivery is not allowed, but breakfast, lunch, and dinner are part of quarantine fees. All of that is now soon going away. It's a huge relief for Chinese nationals living overseas, like this woman in New York City.
I really want to go back to my home immediately. And right now, I'm very emotional. I'm almost like in tears right now.
When's the last time you went home to China?
4 years before, I lost several of my family members during the pandemic. I lost my beloved golden retriever. I feel like I missed everything.
How is your family doing now in China?
Right now, almost everyone got COVID, and they are suffering. Once my grandpa gave me a video call, I cried so badly. At that moment, I even don't know if I will get a chance to see him. He just got COVID, and I hope he will be okay.
On Chinese social media, people have been sharing everything they've lost during 3 years of border controls while they were stuck out of their home country. One writes, I received the bad news of my father's unexpected death while I was in a quarantine hotel, but I couldn't go back to see him for the last time. Another writes, because of the pandemic, I didn't even know that my grandma passed away, and I heard it from my mother a month later. This new change finally ends China's ban on non-essential travel for Chinese citizens. I feel like the pandemic is finally over. The travel plans I made 3 years ago may finally become a reality, she says. It's exciting news for potential travelers, but at home, the country is struggling to grapple with an explosion in COVID cases.
The hospital is just overwhelmed from top to bottom. There was no preparation. Like, nobody knew. There was no stockpiling of medications.
This viral video in the southern city of Guangzhou shows a man kneeling on the ground at a fever clinic, breaking down and begging the nurse to let him see the doctor after waiting for hours. Fever and cold medicine are nearly impossible to get at drugstores across the country. Antivirals are also extremely hard to get, but in a major move, Beijing has announced it's going to start distributing Paxlovid to community health centers in the country.